Man, this episode is cursed.
Welcome to Mana Biscuit, episode number 9, your weekly geek culture podcast. I am RJ Voloski, player 1. With me are player 2 and 3, my co-host Jacob Gamble, TJ Rathburn. How you doing, guys?
I'm doing well.
All right. So, Jacob, I know that you just finished up a heartbreaking defeat in Hearthstone. Would you care to share how that went?
Murloc Rush with a Warlock is not pretty.
All right. Well, how often do you win at Hearthstone? What's your record?
Actually, more often than not. However, I couldn't tell you what my actual record is.
Well,
I don't
blame me for putting you on the spot there. I guess we'll go ahead and get into what
I was just about to say. I don't think they actually keep that kind of information sitting around other than your
I'm
arena
sure they
record.
do.
Yeah. Well, if you like, isn't there like a Hearthhead or something where you can register a profile and track? I mean, goodness, man, I rely on you to be the expert on these things. What's going on?
Yeah, but that's not. I play
right.
for fun and the general competition, not to be the best.
Speaking of doing it wrong,
oh my goodness! Wow, great segue, sir. Great segue. However,
yeah, you're the Hearthstone guy. I've said this before on the show. I get killed all the time. It's fine.
I know.
My record is, I think, 3 and every other game I've played. So it's not pretty with me in Hearthstone. I'm not a great Hearthstone player. But so speaking of doing it wrong, as I said there, we're going to talk about DC and specifically their cinematic and television show properties. So, I mean, where do we want to start with this, right? So I have some ideas that kind of came up regarding some of the announcements that were made this week vis-a-vis crossovers and characters from Suicide Squad, and no crossover between CBS, Supergirl, CW, Flash, Arrow, and Legends of Tomorrow, which is coming next year. But I guess we can start with Supergirl because we completely avoided this topic last week. Because we were all raised that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And the
Wait,
6
what?
minute.
Wait,
Yeah.
what?
Right. Okay.
Isn't like half of what we do saying an unnice thing?
I'm sorry. My mama brought me up right. What can I
Well,
say?
this is the reason we put TJ on the show, was so that way we didn't have to say the
That's
bad
true.
things.
Yeah,
And,
I'm the
more
bad
than
guy.
happy-
oh yeah, well,
I get to be the scapegoat for it. Yeah,
That's
okay.
right.
Well, yeah. TJ is more than happy to tell you when he thinks something sucks. That's for sure. It's fair. It's fair and it's valuable. And so, I guess without further ado, TJ, can you tell us why the 6 minute Supergirl trailer just kind of sucked?
Well, okay. The thing of it, and I haven't. I'd like to first broach the subject that yes, there was the leak of the actual first episode, and no, I have not watched it.
Right.
Not because of any moral high ground. I know a lot of people won't watch leaked episodes because it detracts from the actual episode when it comes out. And I have no moral compunctions against that. So it's not that. I guess I am the bad guy here. And it's just because I haven't been interested. After seeing the preview, it didn't look like it was going to be any good.
Well, it's not just that I wouldn't say I have moral compunction against that either. It's just if I am going to go to the effort to obtain something illegally, I have to be a lot more motivated than the Supergirl trailer made me motivated to see this pilot episode.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely where I stand on it. There have been plenty of things that got leaked that I took a glance at I just don't care about Supergirl. I think that the trailer was uninspiring, and there are rumors that you brought up earlier that the reason why it got leaked, there's a possibility that it was leaked on purpose to combat the dislike on the internet for the trailer.
I think
And that
that's,
could
yeah, I do think that's a very big possibility. Yeah.
Considering nobody is really
and I
legitimately
think
up in
that
arms about this right this second, that it's just making its way through the game channels and things of, hey, this is available, and who is it? Is it CW or CBS is doing
CBS has Supergirl.
yeah.
CBS?
So yeah,
Okay, but
it's like
CBS hasn't made any real
no, and
effort
in the
to
meantime,
say
all they're
much of
getting
anything about
are
it.
blog headlines about, "Hey guys, Supergirl is better than you thought."
Yeah,
And
Right.
yeah, so I
And
think
this isn't
the
the first time that something like this has happened.
sure,
Remember what last year when the test footage for Deadpool was leaked
yeah,
and it came out
right, yeah,
afterwards that it was done on there was interest in getting that movie. So
yeah.
I would not be shocked that this is a very similar sort of viral marketing campaign.
right. So
Uh,
so Jacob, you were saying is when you encountered the press about the leak there that a lot of people were very big on this, saying it was
Yeah.
really good. And something you said that just made me absolutely cringe. It made, I mean, I was already having a rough night last night, but when you mentioned this in your
That
Hangouts
it's
message to me, that somebody put this on par with Daredevil,
Daredevil,
it
which
made my
oh,
skin want to
yeah,
crawl off my
yeah.
body. So go
Somebody
ahead and
put this on
elaborate, sir.
on the Nerdist. Somebody put this on
Was
par
this okay?
with
Hold on
Daredevil,
1 second. On the
and
Nerdist, was this somebody on the Nerdist or a
this
commenter
was
on
the
the
comment.
Nerdist?
This was a commenter on the
Okay, so
oh,
Nerdist.
all right. Well,
okay,
fine.
No,
All
the
okay.
right.
actual Nerdist
Nobody ever should
article.
read the comments.
I always read the comments because I want a general consensus on
Okay,
things.
so but that's fine. You picked it up, so go ahead.
But as we went through, yeah, I mean the podcaster for the Nerdist said that, hey, this really isn't so bad. And then as you scroll down through the comments, there are people going, yeah, this is really good. This is really good. And then this is on par with Daredevil. And even then, you're comparing apples and oranges. I mean, the Daredevil is a beast in and of itself. That anything
Yeah, you're
that
comparing a overripe, luscious, the most perfect gala apple you have ever eaten to a rotten, worm-infested orange.
Now,
well
the
that
thing, what I'm
a
looking
little
forward to
over the
though is
top,
when
but
we all
yes.
I'm looking forward to when we all see it and it is good and we all have to eat
Yeah, right.
it.
I mean, fair
I'm
enough.
not I'm not positive it's going to happen. I just have a feeling that that's our luck.
Well,
Right,
it's gonna
right.
be this is gonna be season 17, and it's gonna go to season 17, and we're still gonna be talking about it a year, 15 years later. It's gonna
Right.
be The Simpsons all over again, and
Because
because it's
this
that good.
it's that good, and
It's
maybe just
it's the
maybe it's the
best.
first step in DC doing it right, because they're doing it wrong right now.
Yes.
And the other part of that we wanted to talk about, unless anybody has any further digs they want to get in at this
Yes.
Supergirl business.
Yes, he does. I have several of them, in fact.
Did you actually have more, or was that just a general yes?
Oh, yes. Moving on.
Yeah, we can move on. We
Okay,
can move on.
all right, fair enough. I didn't want to leave any TJ rants on the table. So
Yeah.
We're good.
okay. All right. So the other thing we were talking about is regarding a couple of headlines that came out this week regarding a downplaying of certain characters on Arrow. The fact that Supergirl, whether or not it's the best thing ever, is not going to crossover with Flash anytime soon. Which Flash right now probably is the best thing ever as far as DC live action TV shows go.
Yes, live action.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get into Batman the Animated Series, but so what Marvel is doing and doing really well right now is creating cohesive universe across multiple networks, across large screen, small screen, and DC seems to just be playing favorites of a sort. I mean, when you have a series like Arrow that's already has its issues. I mean, there are some enjoyable moments in Arrow, but I would by no means call it a good superhero show. But one of its more interesting characters, in my opinion, was Deadshot. And now Deadshot is off the table for Arrow because apparently it's 1998 and Will Smith is a big box office draw or something. But you know, they're cutting off the characters. Harley Quinn suffered the same fate. She was credited. She was an no line part credited as deranged squad female in their Suicide Squad subplot, again to serve the interest of the Suicide Squad movie. So it seems to me where Marvel obviously is integrating everything really well, and even though there aren't all these crossovers, there's references and everything. Feels, even when the tone is just so vastly different with something like Daredevil and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it still feels like it's in the same universe. And that is what I appreciate about Marvel right now. But DC is not doing that at all. It's just not.
Well, okay. This is the promised segue into Batman, the animated series.
The best
because this
DC
is one of the
show.
points.
Yeah.
Yes, straight up. This is the point that I want to make, that DC, this is not the first time that they've done this sort of maneuvering, where they had their film franchises, and then they had television franchises, and they were utterly unconnected, because they did the DC animated universe in the 90s, and they were also doing films in the 90s, although not all of them were great, case in point being Batman and Robin being awful.
Right.
Okay, and now, having segregated out their properties in that fashion, it made it so that when one of them was, tanked, the other one wasn't damaged by the association with it. And that's something that they did pretty well then, and something that can be useful now, especially as we're seeing Marvel with their completely connected universe. There's a very strong possibility of having a negative effect from it being so well tied together. Because what they're doing right now on Marvel side, which is working out well, and I'm enjoying the films and the TV shows and everything. I am a total Marvel zombie. Make my Marvel Excelsior. But what's going to end up happening, what is starting to happen, is a sense of customer fatigue, where as these interconnected films and TV series and things keep coming out, people are going to hit a saturation point where not everybody is going to want to have kept up with, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter and all the Netflix shows and everything, just to enjoy whatever movie happens to come up. And then at some point, if they end up having a flop and it ends up being like Avengers 5 or whatever, where they just lose their footing, if they've invested, $1.5 billion into making that movie, then their entire empire crumbles.
Right.
And that's a very big danger that they're going to have to face.
It is. It is absolutely. And I mean, you saw the same thing with. I think they're trying to get back to this point with the comics, with both universes, DC and Marvel, doing massive resets within the last few years. And you saw a similar situation in the 90s where you had some very popular comic book titles, and they did some very interesting things with reboots, particularly with like X-Men Age of Apocalypse was the one I remember most. Reboots in the 90s, and comic book titles were selling in the millions, and you fast forward a few years later, and maybe it's just competition for the entertainment hours that people have with with internet and on-demand television that has come up, that's kind of detracted from comics. But I think it's mostly just that same level of convolution, which that is definitely a drawback of what Marvel is doing now. So Jay, I have a question for you. Give me your input. Do you think that DC keeping things segregated like this is going to give them more longevity?
I think that some properties are going to thrive because of it, and others are going to absolutely tank because of the lack of support between them being interconnected. Ultimately, I believe that Marvel kind of learned its lesson with Winter Soldier and S.H.I.E.L.D., where if you didn't watch Winter Soldier the second it came out, you were lost in the S.H.I.E.L.D. series. So I think that they did bring in the helicarrier and had a small reference to it as to how it happened in the S.H.I.E.L.D. series, and then moved it up to the film. But so it wasn't anywhere near as bad this time, and I think they learned their lesson on that. However, DC just has no integration whatsoever. I mean, who wouldn't want to see who wouldn't want to see the Flash crossover into Arrow or
Well, Flash
into
does
Supergirl?
cross it over into Arrow.
Oh, pardon me, he
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other part of what they're doing. That is, I mean, maybe in the long run it's a better strategy because the CW shows all are existing in the same
That's right.
universe.
That's
It's just where they're spreading them out to different networks and the big screen. They're just
Yeah.
they're not only separating them, but they're precluding things from each other. Like that's the main point TJ was making about in the '90s, where you had the Batman movies. In his opinion, 3 out of 4 which were great. In my opinion, 2 out of 4 which were great. But
Not great.
Two.
Good. Not great. Good.
well, okay, good, fair
Two.
enough. But still, yeah. I mean, for me, it's the Tim Burton Batman or bust.
Batman Forever wasn't bad for a 10-year-old or whatever I happen to be at the time.
Well, yeah, okay. I guess I would say in retrospect, that's another consideration because as a teenager, I think I even remember going to see Batman and Robin, and I went with my mom and my grandma and with like a lot of my cousins, and so it was like this massive undertaking for them. And I came out of the movie and being like, "That was so stupid," and they were so ticked. They're like, "We just spent all that money, boy. You don't talk about the movie." I'm like, "Okay, I liked it." So
It was great.
but anyway, so yeah, they weren't cutting each other off, and in fact, I mean, it's one of the reasons Batman the Animated Series is the greatest DC show of all time. You had characters that now exist in all these universe. Characters we're talking about, like Harley Quinn, that are big draws that came out of the animated series, and the movies didn't mess with that. The movies had their thing, the animated series had their thing. So I think that's the main thing that I see with what DC is doing wrong right now. I really enjoy the crossover in the Marvel, like I've said, but TJ brought up a good point, in terms of things getting complex. What kind of sustainability will it have? We were also talking about it earlier, and there's this idea that there's a constant buildup with no payoff because everything's leading into the next thing. So that will lead to fatigue after a while, where DC doesn't suffer those challenges. So maybe they will be more successful in the long run. I don't think so. I don't think
they
yeah.
will be. I think at this point there's such an insurmountable lead, at least in terms of financial success.
Right.
The Marvel's not going to get overtaken by DC.
Well, I don't know that they necessarily have. I don't know that we can say that with the movies with the movies not having came out yet. I mean, ultimately DC's got the Dawn of Justice, which is going to do well. I mean,
no, they're gonna.
It's got to. They don't have a choice but to make this do well. They hype the. We lost him.
Did we?
You lost too.
Okay. I did. TJ went really.
Well, you're on screen right now, so just keep talking.
Sorry. But they have no choice but for this to do well. Otherwise, there's no lead in, there's no tie-ins. This has Wonder Woman writing on it. This has a lot of things that if this doesn't go, they lose everything. And go ahead.
I think that that's actually going to end up being a problem for them. I think that that's part of what made the Marvel Universe so successful, was that they not only did they do the thing where everybody got their own individual films, and then they brought everybody together, as opposed to DC that's doing it kind of the opposite way, where they're going to do a big thing and then split people off, which could work. I just don't see it working as well. But what Marvel did, that DC has absolutely failed to do, is Marvel went, we are going to do, after Iron Man, we are going to do a Hulk and a Thor and a Captain America, and then we're going to lead into an Avengers, and we don't care whether or not they do well, because, I mean, in terms of a Marvel film, Captain America, the first Avenger, was not very, profitable. I mean, it still made plenty of money, just not compared to the rest of the Marvel franchises. but they didn't care. They were like, we're doing this and this and this and this and this, and then we're moving into Avengers, however it turns out. And DC keeps going, okay, we're going to do a Superman movie. It didn't really work. We're going to rework it. We're going to do a Green Lantern movie. Oh, it was terrible. We're just going to completely throw that out. Like, they're not standing
Doesn't
behind
even
their
exist
franchises
anymore.
Exactly. They're not standing behind the franchises the way that they need to do. They need to go, listen, we have a vision. This is what we're doing, and go. And if they're planning on doing that this time in the kind of backwards splintery version of their universe, then good. But they have to put their support behind a franchise sometime.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they can't. They don't have Disney backing them like Marvel does. I mean, ultimately, they've got to rely on a third party in order to be, hey, here's our vision, and these guys are, well, it didn't do well enough, and that's a wrap.
That's not entirely true. They've got Warner Brothers, which is not exactly Disney, but it's not anything to sneeze at. You know, Warner Brothers owns DC. That's why everything is all Warner Bros.
Right. Well, the other part of that too is something else we were talking about regarding Marvel, where the entirety of Marvel is dictated in terms of structure and format. You know, and you don't necessarily have that same cohesive vision behind the DC properties, so they aren't probably going to get behind something and franchise it out the way that Marvel has. But at the same time, that's, you know, something that is possibly going to be a drawback for Marvel down the line. But so you know, we've said it before, we'll say it again. You know, right now we're in a golden age for geek pop culture, particularly with comic book movies and comic book TV shows. But the thing about golden ages is that they don't last. So how it peters out, you know, I guess is what we're talking about here. But I think the question is that, or I think there's no question that it ultimately will. So,
well, the thing about golden ages, while they don't necessarily last, traditionally, especially, I mean, we're referring to golden age and we're referring to comic books, but the golden age of comic books wasn't that great. The silver age was pretty awesome. For comics didn't come from the golden age. They came after. When you can start to deconstruct heroes and stuff, when you get into your Dark Knight Returns, more things, your Watchmen, your Miracle Man, or Marvel Man, or whichever it was at any particular time. Oh yeah, that's way post Silver Age.
I was going to say
because the Silver Age pretty much started in the mid '60s and lasted until about the '80s. And then there was the age after that, which sometimes gets colloquially referred to as the Dark Age, because everything started to get gritty and weird.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean that's true for any medium. You know, for me and my background in particular, there is a golden age of science fiction as well, and modern science fiction is nowhere near in terms of style, format, what golden age science fiction was. But there were other phases and ages in science fiction, which, you know, a complete tangent, so I won't get into it. But I think if maybe golden age isn't the right word in that sort of historical context, but we are in a golden age where, you know, if you are a geek, it is a great time to be a geek. But I guess maybe fad is probably it's maybe a little bit longer lasting than fad. I don't know. I guess I'm struggling with how quite to describe this, but I think eventually this is going to pass, and we'll see what comes after.
I think that it probably will pass to a certain extent, because everything in all art is like cyclical. It's just how it works. But I think that a large portion of what ended up happening with the pop culture and why we're seeing the things that we're seeing currently all leads back to right around 2000, 2001 with the 1-2 punch of Spider-Man and The Lord of the Rings, which showed that all of a sudden, which I don't know, it never really occurred to people before, that A, people do like fantastic stories, like everybody seems to enjoy them, and B, nerds nerds are a group market too, and you can market to them hard. We will buy everything. And as a
Shut up and take
like
my
as a
money.
subject, yeah, exactly. And as a subsection of the populace, we do tend to have a lot of disposable income. We tend to, by our nature, like what makes us geeks is that we love the things that we love, and we will do everything we can to support it and to acquire more of it. Like, we're a really, really
Yeah.
profitable group to
Yeah.
throw things at.
I
And
mean,
so I think that we'll see that for a long time.
Yeah, and we have a great example of that with the guy that spent the what $20,000 on the Starship in the video game that has yet to even be released or any legitimate
Yeah.
footage of.
Well,
Your whole the Wing
yeah.
Commander series in the
No, Star Citizen, get it right.
Star Citizen.
Yeah,
My bad.
but yeah, that's yeah. I mean, when you're talking about that section of the population, though, when you're talking about people in like the 6 and 7 figure income range, their hobbies tend to not be dominated by this type of thing. They tend to more often be dominated by things like cars, boating, that sort of thing. So,
Boats.
yeah.
Boats.
But for that middle class range, absolutely, there are a lot more self-identifying geeks and nerds in the middle class now because of the large boom in IT positions, and it's in general, it's like the new factory job is being some IT slouch right now. So yeah, so
This coming from the IT slouch.
well, I guess if you're gonna put me on that scale, I would be more like a skilled trades IT slouch, but
Okay,
but
fair enough.
yeah. So you have a moderately affluent middle class of geeks right now. So yeah, that is definitely we're a capitalist sweat dream for marketing. There's no question about that. So. All right. Well, we've talked a ton about this now. I think more than we even talked about it when we were talking about it last time, but that's good. But there was another subject that I wanted to bring up, and one of the things that we had been talking about previously, is adaptation of comic books to films and television shows. And there's another thing that often gets targeted for adaptation to film. Sometimes television shows, usually very niche television shows, but more often film, and that's video games. And there was an article on Killscreen Daily, a nice little blog for thinking about some of the more academic-y sort of deconstruction.
Academic-y.
Yes. This is from an ex-academic. I don't wear. I mean, I have the fancy hat and the hipster glasses and the big beard. But I'm not. I don't know. It's like academic thought is my guilty pleasure, because there's so much navel gazing in this. It's so much like getting into your own head, and that's something that I do a lot, but I'm not necessarily as proud of it as I am of other parts.
I'm not.
So yeah,
I'm not at all disparaging. I'm not at all disparaging the thought of academic thought in anything, because I think that's something that we should aspire to as much as possible. I'm just really interested in the total bastardization of the word academic, because it seemed really ironic that the word for using words and thoughts properly was the one that you decided to just ship out.
And I think you have struck the nail on the head, my friend. That is exactly what I intend when I approach it with that sort of attitude. It's just what we were talking about in particular on this academic-y site was the article, "The Golden Age of quote unquote crappy video game translations to films in particular." And what it's referring to specifically is the era between 1993 and 1994, when you saw the Super Mario Brothers movie, you saw the Street Fighter movie, you saw the Mortal Kombat movie, and all of this rush to capitalize on the popularity of video games within the film industry. And the article focuses in particular on how games at that era in particular were more games than narrative, and film is obviously in the vast majority of cases a narrative dependent genre or medium, I should say, and they just didn't translate well. I mean, there's some great examples of just ludicrous moments, like M. Bison being magically resurrected after he fell the first time, and he presses a button that's literally labeled like replay or something like that, and it's just it leads to these sort of ludicrous moments. They're just cringeworthy, and they're great. If you're Saturday afternoon and you have a six-pack, I guess probably be the best context for something like that. But other than that, not great films. So you compare that with how games are now. Compare the way games were then, where things were just focused on the game. There was no narrative, and games now are much more narrative focused. They have been for 10, 15 years, and it's getting more and more all the time. The case that narrative structure is one of the defining components of a lot of modern AAA games and even some niche indie games. So that, content-wise, lends itself to a more straightforward adaptation, and we're looking forward now to an adaptation of Warcraft. We're looking forward to potential adaptations of Mass Effect, of The Last of Us, and I think that there's a lot more hope because there's more common ground between the two the media of games and movies, and you can see better translations in that regard. So, on the flip side of that, taking and focusing only on the narrative aspect of the game, there's an interesting project that was done that TJ ran across, so I'll let you talk about it. But basically, with The Last of Us is where we first encountered it, where he just took the narrative out of the game and focused it into a video series.
Yeah, there's a guy, his name is Vodal or Vogtel. It's difficult to pronounce because I'm bad at pronunciation of names. And what he did was he looked into how widely acclaimed The Last of Us was in terms of its story, and how many people had actually played the game, and when able to look at the statistics of how many people managed to complete it, found out that there were a lot of people who never were able to see the entire story. And there was speculation on why, maybe they weren't able to make it through particular sections of levels because they didn't have the technical skill to make it past, or maybe they didn't have the ability to make the time investment because of, family or work or just having an outside life. And so what he decided to do was where he made it as cinematic as possible during the actual gameplay, and then edited all the cinematics and the gameplay through the story into a series of YouTube videos that's aiming around 7 hours long, so that anybody that wanted to see the story that couldn't play it for one reason or another can actually see this story that everybody loves so much. And he's working on a couple of other games as well. And I think this is a really fascinating thing and an excellent thing for us to be doing in order to show the depth of what this medium can do.
Yeah, and it reminds me of another article I saw reposted to Killscreen a few weeks ago about this girl who had, after school, come up homeless in, I believe it was San Francisco, and she was really interested in games, but obviously she was not in a position in her life to be able to buy a game system or buy a gaming PC or even buy the games themselves, because let's face it, games are kind of expensive, and when you're looking for a place to sleep, it's not high on your list. But she did have an old laptop, and she was able to get Wi-Fi here and there, and she started watching gameplay footage on YouTube, and that is what really brought her into the gaming community, was watching other people play. And now obviously she's writing about games as well, and it's just that type of of focus, where you're focusing on these the story elements, the engaging elements of games, and putting it into a format that a lot of people can access, it's absolutely a brilliant thing. Bringing more people into gaming as a hobby, as a passion, as an academic-y interest, and the hobby is better off for it as a whole. Absolutely. And yeah, I've watched a little bit of this Last of Us, and it's phenomenal.
I think that the more we can push the medium into public, like into the public eye, into the mainstream, the better we're going to be, because it is still a young art form, and it needs to be seen as an art form, which is still a massive problem in terms of the perception of games.
Sure.
And this is a step towards making sure that people can see that it's not all mindless games. It's not all violence and like id fulfillment. That there's actual real poignant stories and art coming out of this, and anything we can do to bring up the legitimacy of this platform needs to be done. And there's a lot to be said for gaming as a storytelling medium, because it's one of the very few things that takes the player agency into account, that the storyline can be so much more impactful, because from the perspective of the player, and even in a well-done game, from the perspective of somebody who is simply watching it, it feels like it's you. You did this. When you play games after the fact, when you talk about them or you think about them, in the best games, you don't think about, this as a separate experience. You think of this as something that you experienced.
Right. Well, and there's another point you brought up that I want to go back to real quick about how the games are perceived by those outside of gaming culture, and I think that one of the more prominent examples of that in recent memory was Gene Siskel, or I'm sorry, Roger Ebert, before he died. And I think that somebody like Roger Ebert, who is this film connoisseur, I mean, the guy, to watch him write about film, I mean, if you're trying to learn about film, you really need to read some essays by Ebert. Yeah, the guy knows film left, right, and sideways. And yet, what was probably his first exposure to video games? It was probably Super Mario Brothers, the movie, that he had to sit down and watch and write a review for.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Either that or... honestly speaking, that's not even probably true. His first experience with gaming as somebody that doesn't game is going to be one of the like fear-mongering articles or news stories on television about how video games are ruining our kids.
Well, those
which were everywhere.
With that too. Yeah, I mean, especially in the early '90s when you had the Mortal
Kombat.
Yeah. So yeah.
What was the? I mean, you got to go even further back than that. Well, video games, but games in general. You go to the tabletop.
The Dungeons and Dragons.
The Dungeons
and Dragons.
Yeah,
what was it?
The Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah,
that's what I was making reference. That's what I was thinking of.
Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it goes back, and this is something that for some weird reason has been attached to a lot of things that are associated with nerd culture, because as far back as the 50s, with the like horror comics and such from EC, that there's the reason why we had the comics code for so long with a little stamp that you would see on the cover of every mass-produced comic saying approved by the Comics Code Authority, because a lot of the things that for some reason have ended up being, nerd culture were looked at as being something that will corrupt your youth.
Well, right, and that's also why we have superhero comics now too. I mean, because those were pretty much the only thing you could publish under that code. But so we've covered this one pretty well too. I think the idea of translation across medium, and particularly focusing on certain aspects of games to bring the rest of society into it and outside of the what in retrospect I'm sure will be seen as ridiculous perceptions, just as the perceptions of D&D in the 80s are now seen as wholly ridiculous by pretty much everybody. It's
I don't know
Not
about that.
not so much.
well,
Actually,
I Exhibit A, I have played D&D with not one but two fundamentalist Christians. So,
Yeah.
while I don't necessarily agree with them on all of their stances in life, I can agree with them that they should focus on dexterity for a ranged class. So.
Uh, I think just one little short aside that I would like
Sure.
to make. I think that it's that something that should be important to everybody who considers themselves a geek is to help shift the mainstream perception of these sorts of things, of games and of comics and stuff, as things that are not art, as things that are going to
Yeah.
corrupt children or like be detrimental people. Because everything that I specifically look out for the pieces that if somebody ever comes up to me, games aren't art or comics are for children, that I can point them at a particular thing and say,
Right.
if this isn't art, then nothing is.
Well, right. Yeah, that's I mean, I agree. I agree. Let me start with that. But I also think that sometimes the focus on whether or not games are art can detract from where the focus should be, which is just accepting games for what they are, taking for granted that they're worth being studied, worth being dissected and deconstructed and seen as an academic discipline, which I think in a lot of circles they are. But the argument as to whether or not games is art, yes, it is good geek missionary work to present that to your friends, but I think there's a lot of focus on that particular argument when the focus should just be moving on to, in general with the culture, moving on to let's look at games, let's look at design principles, let's look at aspects of games. And so we're going to go ahead and move along here now into the final quick things we wanted to talk about for this week. Witcher 3 came out last week. None of us have played it yet, but from all reports, it's pretty much...
But we want to.
Yeah, it's pretty much the greatest game that's ever gamed. And what you were talking about earlier in terms
it's probably art.
It's probably art. Well, what you were talking about earlier, in particular with player agency and choice, is one of the things that stood out to me in the literature that's been written on this game since its release, where we've been more or less conditioned to expect the BioWare experience with choices that matter down the line, but they're very clear choices. Also Telltale Games does this. Do you save this person? Do you save this person? Do you preserve this species, or do you let this species die because they could be a threat? And you get some acknowledgement of that down the line. What Witcher 3 has done has made the choices far more subtle and far more plentiful. And while that takes a lot more to plan out from a writing perspective, from a design perspective, it does ultimately get closer to imaging or mirroring the agency that you have in real life. I mean, the choices you make every day, most people don't just approach them and think of them as choices. I mean, maybe they'll agonize over what they should have for lunch, but the choices you make on a regular basis don't tend to be perceived as choices. You just go about your day and you do what you do, and that's how life happens for a lot of people. Sometimes you feel like choices are already made for you, but that's probably getting a little bit too much into what it's like to be a human being. But anyway, the point is that there are many and subtle choices as part of day-to-day life, and I think that when games can start to mirror that, it gives them a much more authentic experience in terms of agency and choice. Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to mention in conjunction with Witcher 3 is that it just means that I am going to have to wait for more and wait and wait and wait and wait as I have for years. I wish they never would have released this trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 those many years ago that they did, because it was everything that I wanted it to be. It's CD Projekt Red. It's a Cyberpunk Shadowrun style game. It's going to be a great action RPG like the Witcher series, and we get
buried.
We get nothing. So, but there was one other thing. There was Doom 3, right?
Oh, see, I thought you were
Doom at E3. Yes.
Yeah, Doom at E3.
Yeah. There is Doom at E3, right? So we got what? Video for that? Like
27 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 10 seconds long. It's like, hey, there's Doom stuff. And then, hey, Demon Guy. And then nothing. Doom. And everybody's like, yay! For really no good reason, except I also was like, yay. So.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. But
I saw one screenshot of it, and it wasn't enough to make me go yay. It was a beautiful landscape look, but there's no substance to it yet. So in order for me to get pulled into something that's Doom, I was never a fan of the series to begin with, and
I don't know
near what we're about to talk about, but.
Well, I think there's one guy who was really yay. I think there's at least one guy in Australia who was really yay. He was like, yeah! With an Australian accent. However that would sound. And
yay?
Yeah.
Yay?
Yeah.
Yay?
And let's not alienate an entire part of our audience if we ever make it that.
Part of our audience.
Yeah, potential part of our audience.
You're
just an entire group of people. Yeah.
Right.
Yay!
Yay! I'm sure is how they say it in Australia, and
because we have a lot of Australians.
But this guy, okay, so he posted a video on YouTube. It got picked up by GameSpot, and it's like 8 or 9 minutes or something like that of him just
10 minutes and 49 seconds.
10 minutes and 49 seconds of just him going over his entire Doom collection, including my personal favorite, the Doom Nutella.
Yesterday I tried to look this up on eBay. There is no Doom Nutella on eBay or any place else that I could find it. It was unfortunate because ultimately Nutella with demon blood sounds delicious. Because Nutella, yes, exactly. Yeah. Whereas just standard Nutella just doesn't cut it anymore. And I believe that.
On that note, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here because I think we're probably going to lose TJ if we haven't already. But so that'll be it for this week's Mana Biscuit. I do want to thank you all for watching. We do it all for you, and you really make it worthwhile. We enjoy getting together and talking, but
there he is
without viewers.
Just the time to say goodbye.
Okay. We got TJ back, so we'll get to him in just a second as we sign off here. But if you enjoyed the show, please do visit us on Facebook.com/ManaBiscuitTV. You can follow us at ManaBiscuitTV on Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Just do it. It would help. It would mean a lot to us.
It's just a click. Just a click.
And,
just one click.
Just one click. And it really would mean a lot to us. And just you watching does mean a lot to us too. But seriously, click that button. So that'll be it for this week. I want to thank you once more. And for Jacob Gamble, for TJ Rathburn, I am RJ Voloski. And we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, I'm back.
Welcome back. Where was I? Oh,
how did I miss a group
academic-y
call?
jacking off.
Yeah, let's discuss that real quick.